Order. Once again, could I remind guests who are leaving the gallery, including my own guests from St Patrick's Primary School in Coatbridge, that the Parliament is still in session and that they should leave as quickly and as quietly as possible. Many thanks. We now turn to the next item of business, which is the members' debate on motion number 8935 in the name of Elaine Murray on the closure of Dumfries control rooms. This debate would be concluded without any questions being put, and I would be grateful if those members who wish to speak in the debate could please press the request to speak buttons as soon as possible. I do say at the beginning of this debate that I would expect that contributions would focus on Dumfries control rooms, and basically that would be the main thrust of any speeches in the debate. I call on Elaine Murray to open the debate. Maximum 7 minutes, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can I start by thanking all the MSPs who signed in support of this motion? And I can apologise for my voice and hope it survives for the next 7 minutes. I submitted this motion for debate in the beginning of February, shortly after the decisions by the Scottish Police Authority and the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service were finally made to close the control rooms in Dumfries. And there, the decisions affected 34 police control room staff and 15 fire and emergency control room staff. Decisions to reduce the numbers of police and fire and rescue emergency control rooms did, of course, not only affect Dumfries and Galloway. Other parts of Scotland also lost control rooms, and MSPs in areas such as the north east of Scotland have also submitted motions expressing similar concerns about their local closures. People in Dumfries and Galloway do not make a fuss readily. However, the reaction from local people to these decisions was both swift and angry. Almost 9,000 people joined a Facebook campaign to save the police control room. Over 11,000 signed a paper petition and over 600 an e-petition objecting to the closure. Local supermarkets allowed campaigners to collect signatures outside their doors. And I would like to congratulate the local branch of Unison on the way in which they organised this campaign to involve so many people in the local community. Copies of these petitions were handed to the chair of the Scottish Police Authority in Inverness yesterday. And there are signs that the local reaction to these closures has had some effect. When the chair of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service came to the Justice Committee on the 11th of March, I brought up the concerns of the so-called displaced emergency control room staff. These staff, mainly female, are uniformed personnel, but they do not and have not ridden on firefighting appliances. The opportunity for local redeployment is therefore more limited, and staff are advised by the Human Resources that they might be considered for other vacancies, for example, at community safety, if suitable posts were available. But when I questioned Mr Waters on the future of these so-called displaced staff, he had said that there would be no compulsory redundancies, and I pointed out to him that if people have to travel 170 or 200 miles to get to work, they might not be able to accept the opportunity offered. And I asked him to guarantee whether people would be offered appropriate redeployment and retraining by April next year. Mr Waters did say on the record, yes. And there also seems to have been some movement on police control staff too. Chief Constable Sir Stephen House, speaking to a Unison seminar on the 13th of March, advised that work is underway to identify positions for staff whose jobs are either at risk either in the Dumfries area or jobs which could be relocated to Dumfries. However, to date, there has been no indication of what these jobs might be, or how many there might be, or when. I am advised by police control staff that morale is low. Two-thirds have taken the decision to leave the service, either through taking another job or voluntary redundancy and early retirement. There have been worrying changes, I'm afraid, in the terms and conditions of the supernumerary pool for police control staff who opt not to take voluntary redundancy or early retirement straight away. The current policy allows staff to go into the pool, but if they have not been successful in finding alternative employment, they can then apply for VR or ER on the same terms as if they had applied straight away. This ceases at the end of this month, to be replaced by a policy whereby the VR-ER packages will be reduced after 12 weeks in the supernumerary pool, and staff members stand to lose the £10,000 pro rata payment and the 4-year compulsory added years. For most staff in Dumfries who have long service, 12 weeks equates to their notice period. This new policy effectively forces staff to opt for VE or ER rather than to be redeployed. And again, this sounds like compulsory redundancy in all but name. Staff will be given notice to leave from the 1st of May, and it is thought that the control room will cease functioning by the end of May. I have also been told that calls will initially be transferred to Pitt Street, with software installed to enable calls from the functioning control rooms to be passed to the Dumfries Police Desk, which will be staffed by police officers. Now, the Chief Constable told the Justice Committee last year that he had no strategy for backfilling. Well, there may not be a strategy, but backfilling will clearly be happening. Unison Scotland estimate that 2,000 police staff have lost their jobs. So it's no small wonder that they are now balloting their members on strike action, urging members to vote in favour, as in Unison's view, trust between them and Police Scotland has broken down. My motion also refers to the statutory duty on both Police Scotland and the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service to take part in community planning. Section 46 of the Police and Fire Reform Scotland Act sets out the Chief Constable's duty exercised through the local commander, and Section 41J2B sets out the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service's responsibilities. But I am astonished that these duties do not seem to have been applicable to the process of closing the control rooms and with the consequence of loss of posts within the local community. Because there was next to no discussion with Dumfries and Galloway Council, nor any meaningful attempt to look at joint control rooms between the two services, or indeed joint control rooms with other services. And I'm afraid this raises significant questions about local accountability, because any consultation which has taken place has done so after the decision was taken by the boards, once the horse had bolted. And I know that the Fire Brigades Union of Scotland has expressed concerns over the scale of reduction of the emergency control centres, in particular the reduction of cover as it happens in the north and north east of Scotland. The closure programme has highlighted shortcomings in accountability and governance within Scotland's single police and fire services. The Chief Constable is accountable to the Scottish Police Authority and the Chief Fire Officer to the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. But who are these appointed boards accountable to? It doesn't appear to Scottish ministers, because whenever MSPs ask questions of the Cabinet Secretary for Justice on these issues, we are advised that these are operational matters. I and my Labour colleagues did support the formation of the single police force and the single fire and rescue service. We still do. There are significant advantages in both, with the ability to streamline services and avoid duplication, and importantly in the access to specialist services across the country, which you've already seen in Dumfries and Galloway. But the process of control and closures highlights serious failings in the mechanisms for accountability set up by the Act. These decisions were taken without consultation with staff, or local councils, or local communities, or trade unions prior to the decisions being made. The Police Subcommittee can call in the Chief Constable and Chair of the SPA to answer questions, but it has no influence regarding how their decisions are made, nor can it demand that appropriate consultation takes place, and there doesn't seem to be any form of appeals mechanism. So in the longer term, I believe that lessons need to be learned and changes made. In the short term, I hope that the levels of support shown by the people of Dumfries and Galloway to the control room staff result preferably in halting the closures altogether. But if it is too late for that, in acceptable retraining and employment opportunities being offered to all those affected. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Many thanks. The debate is popular, therefore speeches of 4 minutes, please. I call Aileen MacLeod to be followed by Graham Pearson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm pleased to have the opportunity to speak in this debate, since it is an issue of significant importance to the constituents that I represent across Dumfries and Galloway, and I'm grateful to Elaine Murray for securing the debate this afternoon. Now, as Elaine Murray has said, the announcement of the closure of the control rooms in Dumfries, and the police control room in particular, came as a considerable shock to people across the region, and the speed with which Police Scotland and the Scottish Police Authority moved from announcement to decision even more so. And this is one of a number of matters which I raised with Chief Constable Sir Stephen House as a matter of urgency following the announcement of the proposal last month. And in his response to me, the Chief Constable advised that he appreciated my concerns over the timescale, but that Police Scotland had to be sure that the SPA was willing to support the proposals before Police Scotland could begin discussions with stakeholders. Now, both decisions, Presiding Officer, by the Police and Fire and Rescue Service will clearly have a substantial impact on the staff involved. And while steps have been taken to reassure staff that there will be no compulsory redundancies for police support staff, many of them will not be able to take up offers of alternative employment or retraining by either service if these are not local to Dumfries and Galloway. And neither commuting nor relocating is a realistic option for most of these staff if the only opportunities available to them are in the Central Belt. Now, I recently met police control room staff in Dumfries with my colleague Joan McAlpine, and the distress both at the announcement and the way in which events had unfolded was clear and entirely understandable. And staff there are right to take pride in the service they provide, and their situation has attracted widespread support right across the region. Now, to be fair, Presiding Officer, to the Chief Constable, I know he has indicated recently that the prospect of relocating some roles to Dumfries is being examined, and I welcome that statement and am keen to see the detail behind that. So I've therefore sought further information on that statement from him and await his response with interest. I do think there is at least the possibility to examine shared facilities, and although shared police and fire control rooms were ruled out of the current proposals, like other members, I note that recent reports that the concept is now being examined for the future, so why not start with Dumfries and Galloway? And as the motion suggests, Presiding Officer, there could be other integrated services which are capable of being included in such a facility, although I accept there would need to be very careful consideration of what those services would be and how they would work together. But local authorities do, for example, have duties and powers in relation to emergency planning and in coordinating emergency response. There might well be a greater level of synergy between services than at first glance suggests. And taking into consideration, Presiding Officer, the plans for the National Energy Industry Liaison Unit in Aberdeen, there is also the potential, in my view, for a centre of excellence in rural and wildlife crime, in which, of course, officers historically based in Dumfries and Galloway have a great deal of experience. Presiding Officer, I wouldn't for a minute suggest that the change is not necessary. I mean, I voted for a single police force and a single fire service, as did many members and other parties here today, and I remain of the opinion that it is the best way of fulfilling our commitments to keep the public safe in the face of Westminster's massive cuts to Scotland's budget. But all of that notwithstanding, Presiding Officer, I hope that Police Scotland, the SPA and the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service and their board fully understand that people in Dumfries and Galloway are angry, they're hurt and they feel very let down, both about the proposals and, as far as police control is concerned, in the way in which that decision was made. So, in conclusion, Presiding Officer, I accept the need for change, but both Police Scotland and the Fire Service have a duty to their staff who are loyal, experienced and effective, and that duty, in my view, extends to them having meaningful employment opportunities in Dumfries and Galloway.
Many thanks. I now call Graham Pearson to be followed by Jim Hume.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I congratulate my colleague Elaine Murray in securing this debate this afternoon on a very important issue that affects 34 staff at Dumfries Control Room. The single police force, as has already been said, is one that we supported. Indeed, on my own behalf, a concept I've supported for more than a decade, and alongside that, the single fire and rescue service. For 7 years or so, there have been discussions about how to introduce such single service provision. And it was within the gift of those in authority to ensure that cross-service provision could have been considered in order that decisions about back-office services and control rooms particularly could have been thought about in the round. In this last few years, we know that already more than 1,200 staff have been made redundant by Police Scotland, and a similar proportionate number within Fire and Rescue Service. Unison indicate that that number will rise shortly to nearly 2,000. 34 staff at Dumfries Control Room were concerned about their posts in November of last year and asked to be informed of circumstances and developments. They were told that there was no information available to them, but they would learn first and foremost their futures from Police Scotland. Their first information in this regard came from the newspapers. And of course, that was devastating for staff who had shown loyalty over a great number of years. The key issues that lay behind this is not only the manner in which the decision was taken, it was the absence of any meaningful consultation, first with the staff about the challenges that were to be faced and the notion of any cross-service support. Secondly, meaningful consultation with the local community about arrangements and a feedback from particularly the local authority and how emergency service provision could be delivered in the circumstances of a public emergency. And then thirdly, public opinion, and knowing whether or not a public service was being provided to them in a manner which was acceptable. As a result, we have staff in police and fire feeling abused. We have Unison, who currently are balloting staff members on the issue of strike. I understand that interim arrangements now have put in place a designated 10 police officers to operate a public inquiry desk at Dumfries in the absence of a control room facility. And I can only describe that as backfilling. In the interim, arrangements are also in place to enable calls transferred from a Glasgow call centre to be telephoned down to that inquiry desk in order that it can be appropriately managed. This does not look like good planning. It's not sufficient that the government should say these are operational matters for the SPA to consider, because there seems to be an absence of a way in which we in this chamber can have oversight of that in an effective sense, and local consultation can be delivered in a way that we understand that communities can feel supported and considered. On that item, I will finish my presentation. Thanks, Presiding Officer.
Many thanks. And I now call Jim Hume to be followed by Joan McAlpine.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I also join with other members across the Chamber in congratulating Elaine Murray on securing this important debate on an issue that struck a chord with communities across Dumfries and Galloway, and it's good to see members from Wigtown up in the gallery today. The debate this afternoon underlines a truly significant change to the way our police and fire rescue services operate their control rooms in Dumfries and Galloway. I can't agree with the two police and fire authority boards' decision to close Dumfries fire and police control rooms at a cost of 49 civilian staff. Closure is not good for policing and fire services across Dumfries and Galloway. However, sadly, I think it's an inevitable symptom of the government's move to centralise emergency services, something which Liberal Democrats, unlike others, have been warning of as far back as 2010. I don't think there can be any price put on community safety, and whilst no one would want the discussion to descend into panic about crime on streets, spiralling out of control and increased response time, I think it is a legitimate concern that local knowledge and jobs will be lost as calls are transferred to a centralised call centre in Glasgow. The old Dumfries and Galloway Police Force was praised by Audit Scotland for its record on crime, and based on what local people, including police staff, have told me, it's unavoidable that the local knowledge built up over years of knowing and working in an area and getting to know its communities and individuals will disappear. That break in intelligence could have a significant impact on community safety when our emergency services need to respond. One of the issues highlighted by Elaine Murray's motion is the lack of consultation with staff. I first want to take this opportunity to pay tribute to the members of staff who have behaved with dignity and respect throughout this whole process, in the face of such appalling treatment from their employers, of course. Sadly, their voices have been ignored, and I'm afraid that the Scottish Government's much trumpeted policy of no compulsory redundancies has not meant much to the employees in Dumfries, who may face a relocation commute to Glasgow. I don't think that's a feasible option. And Elaine Murray is right to say that in all but name, we have seen 49 civilian fire and police staff facing compulsory redundancy. I recognise that efforts are underway to relocate some police staff. However, there remains a great deal of uncertainty for employees and, of course, their families. How many people will be transferred to new posts? Will any new jobs be on the same salary grading, terms, conditions, etc.? Given the lack of consultation with staff until now, what guarantees are being offered that proper consultation will now take place with staff? Perhaps a sign of discontent within the civilian ranks is a decision by Unison to ballot its members on strike action, a decision I'm sure they did not take lightly. Losing jobs in any region is bad for individuals, families and wider community. That impacts much greater in a large rural region like Dumfries and Galloway. Communities are dependent upon the public sector for employment, and every single job is at a premium. So when public sector agencies withdraw from our rural areas, we run the risk of taking away prime employment, and the decision to remove control rooms by the police and fire boards, helped along by the Scottish Government's centralist reforms, creates a dangerous precedent in removing much-needed civil service jobs from rural South Scotland. If the Ministers and Justice Secretary don't believe opposition MSPs about the effect of the Government's reforms on policing and fire services, I hope they will now listen to the police civilian staff members currently being balloted for strike action, and I hope that they can give some assurance that the invaluable skills and knowledge of those employees are not swept up in centralist tidal wave. Thank you.
Many thanks. And to now call Joan McAlpine, to be followed by Lewis MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would also like to congratulate Elaine Murray on securing today's debate and in making a fine speech despite what's obviously a very uncomfortable throat infection. I'd like to start by highlighting the fantastic job done by our local police and fire services, in particular the engagement that they have with their local communities. They've been praised for their work in schools, developing relationships with young people, and the support for Victim Support Scotland's referral scheme remains at the same level as in previous years. The local fire service are known for their expertise in both animal, water and line rescue, as well as ensuring that the road coverage is kept to a very high standard in one of the worst areas of Scotland for the road conditions. And as my colleague Aileen MacLeod mentioned, we visited the staff whose jobs are threatened in Dumfries in the control room and saw the control room working, and were very impressed by the level of local knowledge and the efficiency with which the staff showed, and they were all wearing badges, as I recall, from their union saying front line, and they are front line because they are the public's first point of contact when they're in an emergency situation. The local police and fire services, as I've said, do an excellent job. It's not an issue. What is the issue that's been highlighted by colleagues across the chamber is the unacceptable lack of public consultation over the proposals. Much of the negative publicity around the closures of the control room centred on this lack of public consultation, and rightly so. When I was first alerted to the proposed removal of the police control room, I wrote to the Scottish Police Authority as well as the Chief Constable, outlining the fact that taking decisions in such a way created the impression that a risk to the service was of a real risk to the service, which was once perceived as close to the community, perceived as becoming distant from them. A longer and more transparent engagement with interested parties would have been welcome. I was disappointed in the Police Scotland Chief Constable's response to my concerns. I had hoped to secure a meeting with him and open up a dialogue about alternative proposals, but that request was unsuccessful. I understand that decisions are operational decisions by Police Scotland and Scottish Fire and Rescue, and I would just want to raise the fact that Conservative MSPs, as I recall, abstained from voting in favour of police and fire reforms, unlike obviously SNP and Labour. And one of their fears was that the new service would not maintain its distance from the political process. Well, perhaps Sir Stephen's unwillingness to meet me should reassure them that there is less interference, or there's no influence in terms of politicians in policing. Yes.
Jim Hume.
You and the member, Joan McAlpine, and the Justice Secretary say there's been no political interference, but is it a complete coincidence that the police authority and the fire authority met at exactly the same time to make the exactly same decisions?
Joan McAlpine.
Well, I'm not party to their diary, and I think that would just be pure speculation. As I understand it, they were operational decisions and not decisions that I agreed with. I'm very proud that in Scotland we have managed to increase police numbers. For example, compared to figures for the first quarter in 2007, figures for the first quarter in 2013 show that police numbers were up 6% in Dumfries and Galloway, and that's a trend across Scotland. But this brings me to the crux of the issue. As members are aware, under current circumstances, our budget for justice, the police and fire service is controlled by our grant from Westminster, and over the past few years there's been dramatic declines in the justice budget and police numbers in England and Wales of 10%. Police and fire reform has allowed us to ensure that the massive cuts to Scottish budget from Westminster do not result in this number of cuts to officers. In fact, Scotland has an extra 1,000 police police officers, while in England they're being made
Ms
redundant.
McAlpine, you need to close, and perhaps we could close on the issue of control rooms in Dumfries.
Yes. As I said, I supported a single force, but I don't support a central force, and that could be a danger of some of the decisions that have been made recently by the commanders of these services, and I would look for reassurances for my constituents on that particular point.
Thank you. Lewis MacDonald, to be followed by Margaret Mitchell.
Thank you very much, and I congratulate Elaine Murray not only for bringing this debate today, but also for her campaigning on this issue on behalf of her constituents in Dumfries and here at the Scottish Parliament. The creation of single services, as she said, had the potential to see waste and duplication eliminated and resources transferred to the front line. Instead, what we have seen is a wholesale centralisation of services into the central belt and cuts and closures everywhere else. Dumfries shows more than any other case just how cynically these closure plans have been made. There is no way the control rooms in Dumfries would be closing quite so soon if those closures had not been planned for quite some time before being sanctioned by their respective boards. The failure of both police and fire boards to consult with local councils or communities has been in spite of their statutory obligations on community planning, as Dr Murray said. They have failed in that duty in the case of Dumfries and Galloway and throughout the country. The shoddy treatment of firefighters employed in control rooms and of civilian staff employed in police control rooms and service centres has had a real and serious impact on industrial relations in our emergency services in Dumfries and elsewhere. The Fire Board was presented with a change in the costings of the various options before them on the morning of their meeting of over £1 million, apparently the only way for management to secure a majority at that meeting for their preferred option of closing every control room out with the central belt. The Fire Brigades Union are understandably very angry at the way their submission was disregarded by the Scottish Fire and Rescue Board. But moving the goalposts at the Fire Board meeting was as nothing compared to what transpired at the Police Authority meeting to decide on police control room closures, including Dumfries. Here there was no vote. There were no serious questions asked about the consequences of the proposed closures. There were not even alternative options properly debated or discussed. Nobody spoke up for staff or the public in Dumfries or anywhere else. It was as if this was a minor and insignificant decision handed down from on high, rather than the withdrawal of vital services from large parts of Scotland with the loss of hundreds of jobs. So angry are police staff that Unison and Unite and other unions are balloting their members over industrial action, something, as Jim Hume said, that nobody in the emergency service considers doing lightly. And of course, this is the responsibility of ministers. Their failure to accept any of the many amendments to the Police and Fire Reform Bill, which were designed to achieve some degree of local accountability, makes them ultimately accountable for the decisions taken by the boards which they appointed. Now we hear talk, and I heard what Aileen MacLeod said very clearly, of shared control rooms for emergency services, at the very time those boards appointed by ministers are pressing ahead with plans to close control rooms from Dumfries to Aberdeen. Ministers could and should step in right now and order those closure plans to be set aside if they are serious and want to listen to the proposals about shared service solutions in those cities and towns. Ministers should also recognise that closing a control room in a town or city many miles from the nearest alternative workplace is compulsory redundancy. Acknowledge that current policies and closure decisions have seriously damaged relationships between employers and workers in our emergency services, and call a halt to the closure programme until there has been genuine and meaningful consultation with local staff, local councils and local communities. That way, loyal public servants from Dumfries to Aberdeen will feel that they are at least noticed by the government of the day, rather than feeling that they are overlooked and disregarded for daring to live and work out with the Central Belt.
Many thanks. I now call Margaret Mitchell, to be followed by Hanzala Malik.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I commend Elaine Murray for bringing forward this motion today, and my comments reflect the views of my colleague Alec Ferguson, who fully intended to speak in this important debate, but for unforeseen circumstances has been unable to do so. At a time when jobs are being lost and services being withdrawn, not just in Dumfries but Scotland-wide, the motion accurately reflects the mood up and down Scotland. In order to provide some context to the changes happening in Dumfries, it's worth looking at the issue in the round. A few weeks ago, 61 police station public counters were closed, including stations close to Dumfries in nearby Kirkcudbright and Dalbeattie. This leaves only 153 police stations now open to the public, as compared to 386 stations which were open to the public in 2007 when the SNP came to power. These closures have not only resulted in job losses, but in Dumfries and Galloway they represent a withdrawal of frontline and local services. In addition to this, last year the Scottish Government pushed through the closure of 10 Sheriff Courts, 7 JP Courts, including Kirkcudbright, resulting in what can only be described as the withdrawal of justice from many rural communities. And most recently, the Scottish Police Authority and Fire and Rescue Services have approved plans to close 6 police control rooms and fire rooms, including the site in Dumfries. Presiding Officer, these closures are putting considerable strain on our rural communities because they will result in the loss of highly skilled jobs. They also worryingly represent a withdrawal of local justice and a reduction in the quality of service offered in order to save money. The closure of Dumfries Police Control Room clearly illustrates this very point, given the closure will affect 34 quality jobs. In a rural community, this is a major blow. And we know that whilst we are assured there will be no compulsory redundancies, staff is being asked to either relocate considerable distances or apply for unsuitable and often lower paid jobs. And as many members have said during this debate, this amounts to compulsory redundancy in all but name. When I visited Dumfries in January as part of the Justice Subcommittee's scrutiny of local policing, I heard firsthand from those in a position to know that closure of control rooms will result in loss of local knowledge. This concern has repeatedly been dismissed by Police Scotland, but with emergency calls being diverted from Dumfries, there is absolutely no possibility that call handlers from Glasgow or Motherwell, 65 or 75 miles away, will have the same knowledge as those in the area. The truth of the matter is, Presiding Officer, that local people have barely been consulted on this move. A token consultation was lodged towards the end of last year, and the decision to close taken late January this year. And as Stevie Diamond, Chair of Unison Police Staff Scotland, confirmed, the Scottish Police Authority was not allowed to consider alternatives to closure. IT reforms which could have allowed the existing sites like Dumfries to be retained by allowing them to communicate with others and deploy officers from different legacy forces were dismissed in the SPA policy document and were not even considered by the SPA board on the basis of cost. Presiding Officer, these are bad decisions implemented badly without accountability to the public, which the public is entitled to expect.
Many thanks. And finally, before I call the Minister, I call Hans Malik.
Thank you very much and good afternoon, Presiding Officer. I also like to take the opportunity to thank Elaine Murray for securing today's debate. Thank you, Elaine. I was very sorry to hear that Police Scotland has decided to cut the number of control rooms operated by the new national force. I feel sorry for all the civilian staff as their jobs are disappearing. 34 in the Police Scotland and 15 with Scottish Fire and Rescue Services. And I understand that there is considerable anger and resentment at this proposal. As a result of this decision, public confidence in Dumfries and Galloway and possibly around the country in Police Scotland will rapidly diminish. Police Scotland say the implementation of this proposal will improve the response to 999 emergency calls. but I say it will actually threaten community safety. Local knowledge is important for a quick response time, and only local people based in local stations can provide this service. These closures are going to put lives in danger and aid the petty criminal, and in turn, crime rates will in fact go up. We are told the IT systems will pinpoint the location of callers, but can we be sure? Technology can and does fail on occasion, and you will not find local places' names on mapping systems. Also, local dialects can mean calls are difficult to understand, especially if the call handler is in a completely different part of the country. And sometimes we have that problem just within Glasgow. There needs to be a fuller consultation to this period of process of closures to ensure control rooms are considered properly and the consultation takes place urgently. I couldn't believe, and I can't begin to understand how shocked the staff members were. Why weren't they consulted, or at the very least warned? The people affected are well-trained, experienced and dedicated workers whose local knowledge, professionalism has provided help and reassurance, and on many occasions saved lives. This is certainly a strategic decision, as I am sure Glasgow, Stirling, Glenrothes and Aberdeen will probably be next. Therefore, I am calling on the Minister to reassure me that that is not the fact, and in fact, the government, with consultation with unions and staff, will actually carry out a proper consultation in any other place that is to be considered, and that people will be treated with respect and dignity which they are entitled to. We don't seem to understand that a lot of the workers who actually deal with very difficult calls on occasions are doing so from years of experience. And I genuinely believe that that experience is going to be lost at the cost of our communities. And I think it is important that we treat people with due course and attention. And I think that as a government, we have the responsibility to do the honourable thing, and that is to consult with people and make sure that we actually carry them with us. I hope the Minister will have the opportunity to address my fears. Thank you very much.
Many thanks. And I now call on Rosanna Cunningham and invite the Minister to wind up the debate. 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Like others, I welcome the opportunity provided by Elaine Murray for further debate on police and fire control rooms, and I congratulate her for getting through her opening speech despite the obvious difficulty she was having. I've listened with interest to the contributions, and I do think it is important to set some context for this discussion. Both services have made unequivocal commitments to protecting frontline delivery despite Westminster cuts. They are improving the services they deliver to communities to make them safer. Creating a safer and stronger Scotland is right at the heart of what both services do. It is what they are about. It is the foundation on which decisions are made. As Elaine Murray knows, Presiding Officer, it is not reform that has brought rationalisation of control rooms to the fore. Ms Murray and the rest of the Justice Committee heard just 2 weeks ago that such discussions have been underway for years. Piecemeal, uncoordinated work across Scotland's legacy services sought to identify precious savings to protect an even more precious frontline resource. And the Dumfries Fire Control Room was earmarked for closure long before the single services came along. It only receives, on average, 3 or 4 calls per day, despite having 15 staff. The Police Control Room receives, on average, fewer than 30 per day, with 34 non-uniformed staff. And that is simply unsustainable, particularly when budgets are under significant pressure.
Elaine Murray.
Does the Minister accept, however, that the staff do an awful lot more than just answering emergency calls, or a whole load of other responsibilities, which I'm sure that other members who visited recently observed while they were there?
Minister.
That may be true, but the control room function has to operate on the basis of the figures that I've given here today. And I think it's important we keep that in mind. It is unsustainable, particularly when budgets are under pressure. And Police Scotland are still, in fact, involved in the statutory consultation with the affected staff. Not all staff have indicated their preference. Aileen MacLeod, Joan McAlpin and Elaine Murray herself will no doubt be pleased to hear that there are a variety of potential options identified. Voluntary redundancy, redeployment, other jobs from within the service transferring into Dumfries and Galloway. I'm assuming that would be welcome. And indeed engagement with other public sector partners out with the service. So a great deal of discussion is taking place. As both the Fire Brigades Union and Her Majesty's Chief Inspector recently emphasised, the creation of single services provides the opportunity to take a holistic approach, developing resilient 21st century control infrastructures. And could I just take up the point that Jim Hume made about the meetings of the two boards coinciding to take the same decisions on the same day? I mean, in fact, he is quite wrong, and I think he must know that, because the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service had already made a number of decisions in September of last year, and that included the decision on the Dumfries and Galloway control room and two others, based on the stark statistic of the average of 4 emergency calls that I've already indicated to the Chamber.
Lewis MacDonald.
I'm very grateful to the Minister. Given that the Fire Board did indeed take a couple of bites at this before coming to a decision, was she as surprised as everyone else that the Police Authority Board made such quick decisions on the basis of such little prior discussion?
Minister.
Well, as Lewis MacDonald well knows, it is not my job as a minister to put myself into the place of the Chief Constable and the senior officers of Police Scotland and try and micromanage their decision-making process for them. Police and fire services have been bold enough to tackle difficult challenges head-on, and as a result will ensure that resources are more effectively mobilised right across the country, reducing the risk of operational failure. And the boundaries of the former services are no more. Joint police and fire control rooms have categorically not been ruled out, but the issue is one for the future. The risks and costs involved would simply be a step too far at this time. And that is the professional opinion of those we charge with keeping us safe. And with that in mind, surely Elaine Murray and others will agree that it would be wholly inappropriate to consider an even more radical and no doubt more costly and more risky proposal for joint delivery at this stage. But this absolutely does not mean collaboration is off the agenda. Engagement is already underway across the blue light services to consider how, in time, systems can be better integrated and resources shared effectively. And a joint event bringing the police and fire boards together is taking place next week. I can guarantee that exploring options for working together will be one of the issues up for discussion. And I will repeat what I said in, I think I've given enough interventions. I will repeat what I said in a similar debate last month. In any change programme, decisions will be made that cannot please everyone. Elaine Murray usefully reminds us that Labour supported the move to single services, but it does seem as if their idea of single services would have resulted in a dedicated control centre for every community planning partnership in Scotland, because that is the logic of their argument. Jim Hume mentioned the huge change the control room proposals will bring, but of course we have been here before in the 1970s when local authority reorganisation took place, including big changes to police and fire services. I don't know if members in this chamber retrospectively wish that had not happened. Perhaps they should tell us if that is the case. And I note in passing that while alleging a centralising agenda on the part of ministers, some members are just to, well, step in and overrule two boards, which no doubt is a decision that would eventually be held up as an example of political control of police and fire. In truth, we need to put our trust and faith in the professionals. under the scrutiny of their respective boards when they do assure us that frontline services will be improved, that everyone across Scotland will have better access to the services they need, and that all will be mobilised through modern, resilient control room infrastructures. This is what the reforms voted for by this Parliament were intended to deliver. I firmly believe that that is exactly what these consummate professionals will deliver, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes Elaine Murray's debate on closure of Dumfries control rooms. And I now suspend this meeting of Parliament until 2:30 p.m.